pleasant day to everyone. So you've just had your quiz number 5 on gender-based violence. Over the holiday, we're given this assignment to study this very important topic in gender and society. Gender-based violence is a manifestation of gender bias in society, and it is probably considered as one of the most serious social problem all over the world. In fact, during the pandemic, it became worse, and they say gender-based violence is the shadow pandemic because of its widespread occurrence. Before we go ahead and review the items in this quiz, remember the definition of gender-based violence, that it is any act or a series of acts that may result or likely to result to physical, sexual, psychological, emotional, or economic violence to an individual based on his gender identity being a man, a woman, or an LGBT. Remember the various basic concepts related to this topic on gender-based violence. We discussed in our last lecture. I discussed in my last lecture the various forms of gender-based violence and those that are prohibited by law, as well as how they occur in other countries and how they are treated, the such as violence against men and against LGBT. What are the forms of these human rights violations? Let's now dive into the quiz that you just had. So that this is the Google form that you answered. There are two parts in this quiz. The first part is true or false, wherein you're required to answer true if the statement is true for all cases and false if it is not. Okay? And the second part is filling in the blanks to complete the sentences given. Okay, there are 15 items for each subtest. We go now to true or false. The items in this quiz are based on the lecture that was given to you. So you answer in that context. So for the first item, gender-based violence is the most widespread crime all over the world. As I said in my introduction, it is one of the serious manifestations of gender bias or gender discrimination. It is considered to be worse than the pandemic. The second item is jurisdiction is the power of the courts to hear and decide cases. For the first item, gender-based violence is the most widespread crime all over the world. When we talk about crime, it is a violation of a given law in a particular country or society. A crime is an act that is penalized by law. And gender-based violence is considered to be a violation of human rights, and it is for many countries, but not all. But not all in some cases, like in the case of gender-based violence committed against men, are considered to be crimes and penalized by law. When we say penalized, we are talking about the power of the state to protect the rights of citizens within the context of the human rights-based approach. For question number 1, the answer is true. So for question number 2, jurisdiction is the power of the courts to hear and decide cases. This is true. The power of the courts is known as jurisdiction. So each level of court has its own jurisdiction. So the extent or the coverage of the power of each court at each level, we have already discussed the hierarchy of courts. This is known as jurisdiction. So the Supreme Court has its own jurisdiction as defined by law, as well as the Court of Appeals and the other lower courts. So again, jurisdiction is the power of the courts to hear and decide cases. Number 3, in criminal cases, the offended party may file 2 cases, one criminal and the other for damages. Okay, what did you learn about this? The correct answer is true. Actually, when a crime is committed, so a crime again is an act that violates a special penal law or the revised penal code in the context of the Philippines. If a crime is committed, it means that a law that is public is being violated. But there are two parties to be considered here. One is the state, which is concerned about peace and order. That's why it has these criminal laws. And the other one is the private person, no, whose rights are violated, who is considered to be the victim of the crime. No? In the first case, of course, the convicted party may face criminal liability, but he has to also pay civil liability for damages on the rights of the private person who is considered to be the victim of his crime. So the answer for number 3 is true. Number 4, the obligation of the government to provide is accomplished by special criminal law such as the anti-trafficking law. So what is the answer to this question? It is false. When we considered criminal law, it is one that protects the rights of people because it is a higher level of government obligation. Diba? You remember that the government has the obligation to respect, to provide or fulfill, and the third and highest one is the obligation to protect. No? What is the distinction for each? So if you remember the levels of obligation under the human rights-based approach, for the first one, the government is required to refrain from taking any action that would violate the rights of people. Okay? So that is for respect, no? And then the second one is to fulfill or provide, which means that the government has to provide the needs of the people in terms of its programs, no? Such as education or health, etc. But the third one is distinct in terms of its urgency to protect the rights of people and its seriousness, so such that the government now requires that the one who violates the rights of others may be penalized. What we mean by penalty is that one may be imprisoned or one may be required to pay damages. No? Okay? So may babayarang danyos. Yan ang ibig sabihin. So for number 4, the answer is false because this is the government's obligation to protect, not to provide. Okay? And then for number 5, according to the 2017 study based on my lecture, 1 out of 7 women victims of domestic violence sought help from others. This is true or false? This is false because established in that study that it is 1 out of 3 women. No, the help-seeking behavior of women victims of domestic violence is manifested only by 1 out of 3. Ganong ka konti ang humingi ng tulong because of many reasons that those that we have already discussed in my lecture. One, that they want to protect family solidarity, and in the Philippines, women are very modest. Ayaw nila ng pinapublic yung buhay nila, no? Kasi kapag nag-file ka ng kapag humingi ka ng tulong, bali ina-expose mo yung sarili mo, yung privacy mo sa ibang tao. So lalo na kapag yan ay domestic violence, ayaw nilang sasabihin na yung pamilya niya ganyan. So what is the answer for number 5? It is False. It is 1 out of 3. For number 6, the act of transporting a person to a place with the use of force or fraud or for the purpose that is against their will is penalized by the Anti-Trafficking Against Person Act. Is this true or false? Of course, you know that it is true. So in the Philippines, we already have an expanded Anti-Trafficking Against Persons Act. Number 7, the Pemberton case pertains to the appeal that fixed the Supreme Court stance on protecting the interest of the LGBT. The answer here is true. Of course, you already know that this is one that is closest to our backyard, no? 'Di ba sa Olonga po ito nangyari. And this opened the public to the question on whether the government has sufficient action to protect the rights of the LGBT because the victim here is a gay person or homosexual person na pinatay because he is gay, no, by a US citizen. The answer for number 7 is true. Number 8, majority of the victims of gender-based violence are minors. This is true. What about minority? When one is a minor, one does not comprehend fully his rights and the extent to which he or she can protect his or her rights. And also, he or she has limited knowledge on the laws that and other institutions that might come to his aid when gender-based violence is committed against them. For question number 9, gender-based violence against women and girls is linked to many poor health outcomes, including long-term mental health disorder. The answer here is true. Number 10, it reads that in People versus Sinosa, the government exonerated the accused and accepted the battered woman syndrome as a justifying circumstance. You remember People versus Sinosa, which is a landmark case in domestic violence, where the accused, Mrs. Sonosa, who killed her husband, was 9 months pregnant, was battered so badly that when her husband was drunk, uh, fell asleep, she shot him, and in the process, he died. And so a case was filed against Mrs. Sonosa for the crime of murder. And here, the court recognized the relevance of the accused being a battered woman, and it is considered as a mitigating circumstance. She was not exonerated. Pag sinabi nating exonerated, napawalang sala because of this justifying circumstance. But the court here, because the justices used the revised penal code as basis for their ruling, held that since the circumstances that would justify the accused here are absent in self-defense. In self-defense, the elements are one, that there must be an unlawful aggression, that secondly, there must be a reasonable means to prevent and repel it, and thirdly, that the person defending himself must not have any part in the provocation. But there was no aggression since he was asleep. In People versus Sinosa, the government exonerated the accused and accepted the BSW as a justifying circumstance. In this case, we consider this case as a milestone in. We consider this case as a landmark case because it was the first time that the court recognized the battered woman syndrome as a circumstance that would modify criminal liability. because here the victim was murdered by the accused. However, because of the circumstances that Mrs. Sonosa was a battered woman, and at the point nearest to the incidents of killing her husband, she was she was threatened physically, and because she was 9 months pregnant, she was also concerned for the life of her fetus that she was carrying. This was considered by the court to be a mitigating circumstance, but they did not entirely excuse Mrs. Sonosa because there was no prior ruling. This was the first case where there were such circumstances to be considered. Okay, but for the succeeding cases, the battered woman syndrome is then considered by the court because of this landmark case. Okay, let's proceed to the next item. Harming pets does not serve as ground for Bowsy complaint. Of course, if you listen to the lecture, you will know the answer. The answer here is false because this is one way of imposing psychological or emotional harm on the victim, no? Even though we are talking of pet animals, which may be owned by the victim, and you think it does not harm her directly, but the psychological or emotional harm done to her may serve as a ground for a complaint. The answer here is false. Number 12. There are 5 forms of violence as prohibited by the current law in the Philippines. The answer here is false. There are 4: uh, physical, sexual, psychological, emotional, and number 4, economic violence. Okay, let us proceed to the next item. Under the law, rape is considered to be a public crime. The answer here is true. What we mean by a public crime as against a private crime is that a crime committed that involves the stake of the public, meaning the public is being harmed by this particular violation. And so, if it is a public crime, anybody can file the case in behalf of the victim. Now, of course, with our particular circumstances as provided by law for the one who will be filing the case. And then the private crime, if it is a private crime, only the private victim can file the case. But in our present law, rape is now considered to be a public crime. So the answer here is true. Number 14, in the Philippines, the court gives weight to the testimony of the female complainants of gender-based violence, even though there is no witness in the offense committed. The answer here is true. Of course, if it is a crime against women, or it is a gender-based violence, and maybe crimes in general usually are not committed in public. Of course, the criminal wouldn't want many witnesses, and especially for crimes committed against women, usually this happens in private, no, in a private area where nobody can see or witness. The 15th and the last item says that the anti-domestic violence law complies to the equal protection because it does provide the same protection to battered husband. What is the answer here? True or false? The answer here is false. We have discussed this in class that the anti-domestic violence law, or RA 9262, protects women and their children, victims of domestic violence. Battered husbands may be protected by other laws such as the revised penal code, but not by RA 9262. We have discussed this that I have stressed that during the passage of the law, it was already debated in Congress whether the victims should include the husbands. But the Congress has decided that domestic violence is a women's issue because an overwhelming majority of the victims are women. Okay, so the answer here is false. But there is no question about equal protection because equal protection is also complied in the law because there is adequate distinction between men and women victims here, no? The adequate distinction is that there are more women who fall victim to the crime of domestic violence. So there is no question about equal protection here. Okay, we proceed now to the next subtest, which is fill in the blanks. So for number one, gender-based violence is an act of gender-based violence that results in or likely to result in physical, sexual, psychological, and blank harm or suffering to individuals because of their gender. The answer here is economic. Okay. Number two, violence against there are three blanks are the three forms of gender-based violence. So the answer here is violence against women, men, and LGBT. So those are the answer to the blank sections. Number three, RA blank or the Anti-Domestic Violence Law in the Philippines provides for three types of protection order. Of course, you already know this is RA 9262. Don't forget. Number four, gender-based violence is the most widespread crime all over the world, and that it is known as the blank pandemic. I've mentioned that in the introduction. This is known as the shadow pandemic because it is happening. Just like COVID, it is happening at the very moment we speak in the privacy of the homes, in public spaces. Women are being subject to violence, and the children too. Number five, according to the United Nations, one out of blank women suffer from gender-based violence in their lifetime. This is one out of three. The answer here is three. Number six, domestic violence is a development issue because it prohibits women from fully participating in the development process. So they cannot participate in the economy fully because they are being prevented by their spouses, or the violence itself prevents them, like they are being hospitalized, they are being forced to go on leave because they are suffering physical, mental or emotional or sexual violence, no? The effect of these different kinds of violence, or perhaps they cannot access resources to be able to fully participate in the economy. So domestic violence is a development issue, and when it affects the children as well, no. How does domestic violence affect the children? They may be withdrawn from school, or they may have post-traumatic stress disorder when they witness the violence, or they themselves become victims of violence. These are national issues because the effects are affecting the progress of our country. Number seven, according to the 2017 study, 56 of the cases of spousal violence is due to blank. So if you listen to the lecture, the answer here is due to the drunkenness, or most of the perpetrators perpetrator's spouses are drunk at the time when they committed the violence. Number 8, sexual harassment committed within the home by relatives is not covered by the Safe Spaces law because blank. Because safe spaces law covers public spaces. So, if it is within the home, it might be another crime. Okay, number 9, cyber stalking is not covered by this safe spaces law or RA blank. This is RA 11313 or the safe spaces law. Is it covered? It is covered. It is covered by the spaces law. So this is bonus question. Number 10, catcalling by friends during a birthday parties in their family home is not covered by the safe spaces law because again, the safe spaces law is one that covers public spaces. Kapag family home yun, that is within the privacy of the home, no? Unless the home is converted into a public space, okay? Like you're renting out your home to uh, other person. So when it is rented out, it may become a public space. Number 11, violence against men is a form of course, you know that it is also a form of gender-based violence. Number 12, it is documented that many countries criminalize homosexuality because of the tradition of patriarchy or of the culture of machismo, okay, or because of religion, or any of these answers will be correct. Okay, number 13, blank is an example of violence against homosexuals. When they are harassed, they are being bullied, and those other crimes that cause them physical, psychological, emotional, and sexual violence. This is an example of gender-based violence against LGBT. Number 14, blank is one way of countering violence against women and children that is caused by unequal division of labor at home. What is a way of countering unequal division of labor at home? That is shared responsibility, no? And when we talk about rearing the children, that is shared parenting, okay? It's either shared parenting or shared uh, responsibility. And number 15, last item, blank is one way of countering economic violence against a spouse. One way is to provide them with opportunities to earn and to support them in their businesses, or if it is the spouse being the victim, he or she must find ways to help the other spouse in earning for the family. That's one way of preventing economic violence. For women, it will be safe if one is employed or one has her own business. Okay, so there are many other issues about gender-based violence that should be looked into because there are many other crimes that may be considered as gender-based violence. So this is a whole ocean of issues, no, gender-based violence, and it will be good that we understand this in the context of how it affects the development of this country. So I hope that you, being future professionals, have a full understanding of the issue of gender-based violence and be part of the solution to this problem in our country. Okay, good day, and please be prepared for the next topic in our course on gender and society. Please like and subscribe.